So everyone, I'm doing some tests on this Sigma 500mm DG EX HSM prime lens. It's an older lens that came out in 2005. It has no image stabilization, but it is a sharp lens, particularly at f8. However, I do find at f4.5 on a crop sensor camera, it's a little bit on the soft side. Anyway, we're going to test it out with some test charts we have here, as you can see in the picture. And I'll just show it to you. We've got lots of test charts here that we're taking some pictures of. Ideally, we want to be checking the sharpness. So this should give you a good indication how sharp it can render the tests that we're running on this. So we're going to be looking at using aperture f4.5, 5.6, f8, f16 on a 32 megapixel 90D and a 30 megapixel full frame EOS R, a mirrorless camera. This is an EF lens, so obviously we have to use the EF adapter on the EOS R, and we're looking to see and look at the sharpness that can be achieved on the test charts. I'll give you a real world examples at some point in the future. I'll do that next. I may do that tomorrow, so you can get an idea on quality. I've already done a video of this lens versus the contemporary 150-600 Sigma lens, and I found pretty much at f8 the images are pretty good. Another side note that I haven't mentioned in previous videos. Now, you may not be aware that I have actually reviewed the Sigma 150-600 Contemporary Sport and the Tamron, the first edition that they did, called the G1 lens. I realised they'd brought a new one out since then, called that's the G2. But I need to make it absolutely clear that the Sigma 150-600 zooms, while they're fantastic lenses at f8 and above, I do find them to be quite soft at 6.3 aperture. So wide open, the Sigma zooms are not absolutely pin sharp. You need to be aware of that. I've looked at so many examples. I've obviously reviewed the lenses myself. I've looked at images, and the consensus I've come up with is that those tele-zooms that Sigma have come out with are not very sharp wide open. So ultimately, if you want wide open sharpness to be fantastic, you're going to need a prime lens. So this is the older prime lens that Sigma brought out in 2005. I am fully aware that they brought out an F4 optical stabilized version of this lens that's completely f4, not 4.5, so it's half a stop better. We're going to test this particular lens out though, the older lens, on these tests, and hopefully we'll get a good idea of how sharp they are. Now, in my real world testing of this lens outside at f8, even at f4.5, on full frame, to my eyes, it's good. It's when we put it on an Apsc camera does it sort of let it down a little bit, this lens. So it does seem the taxing of the smaller pixels that are on the sensor, on the Apsc sensor, is a big challenge for this lens. But on full frame, I think it's really good. So without further ado, let's look at the examples, the pictures. We'll look at them, we'll zoom into them 100%, and we'll see, you know, what we're getting out of this lens on full frame. So the camera I'm testing the full frame out of is the EOS R at 30 megapixels. I'm going to be using JPEG images for that, and the same for this, but this 90D can do 32 megapixels, so slightly more megapixels. It's not a big difference, to be honest with you. So let's check out the images and let's see which is the better. personally, I'm probably thinking that on this older lens that came out in 2005, the lens weighs 3 kilograms. It does suffer with a little bit of chromatic aberration, I must be honest with you, but it's pretty good in terms of sharpness, and I've done lots of videos on this lens as well, so check those out. But personally, I think this is a good lens if you're wanting something, you're on a budget. You can get hold of this lens for about £1,500 on eBay pretty much. I know they did a previous version to this which was just EX, didn't have the DG lettering in the actual name. That's pretty good as well, but this has a few extra SLD DG elements, coatings, that make it slightly better than that older lens. So obviously this minimum focus on this particular lens is 4.5 meters, so it is a long way. I was approximately about 5 meters away from the test samples we've got here. So on the 90D, because of 1.6 crop, we're getting 800 millimeters. So in order to get a similar vantage point to the full frame, or on this 500mm lens, I've had to go back a little bit just to try and compensate and try and give you a similar framing of what we're taking a picture of, to give you a good comparison. So let's get over to the examples and check them out. So carrying on from the introduction video, we've got some samples here on the 500mm Sigma lens that came out in 2005. So what I want to do is look at some samples on these test charts we've looked at and taken a picture of, and we're going to look at the 4 different apertures. We're going to look at F4.5, which is wide open, F5.6, F8 and F16 respectively, and what we're looking for is sharpness. So we're using the EOS R full frame 30 megapixel mirrorless camera to test out the capabilities of its lens wide open. So what I want to do is I want to zoom in. We're going to have a look at various parts on the lens and see if we can determine if it's a good lens or not. So first thing to do is have a look at looking at the center of the image. So this particular image here is at f4.5. So this is the test chart we've got here. So let's zoom in right into the middle of the image. I like to go to about 50%, sometimes 100%. Looking at the image, it looks really sharp and really nice. Let's go into 100%. It's rendering the image really well, and it looks extremely sharp in the center. If I'm looking at these 2 dots here, if I was to pick up something negative, it doesn't quite look pin sharp, but remember we're looking at 100% here, at 500mm, so it's, you know, it's representing the test chart really well. So let's zoom out and get back to where we was at 25%. So what we like to look at is the corners now, to see how the corners are represented in the image. So let's just get down to the corner here. 100% there. It does appear to be less sharp in the corner here, but it still looks pretty good. Obviously make your own mind up if you think it's significantly sharp enough for you, if you are thinking about obtaining this lens yourself. So let's just come out of there, back to 33%, and let's have a look in the top corner, because what a lot of lenses tend to happen is they tend to be off center, and what you'll find is sometimes a certain corner will be sharper than the other. So let's just zoom into 100% here. Again, it looks very uniform to me. It's not quite as good as the center, but it still looks quite good there, looking at that. So let's just zoom out again, Let's go into this corner, top right corner. It does seem to be a manufacturing issue with a lot of lens manufacturers that the top right corner and the bottom left right corner don't seem to be as good as the left. I don't know if that's a case with most lenses out there, but it does seem to be the case with a lot of lenses that you'll look at. So let's zoom back out, 33%, and let's zoom in this corner here. Pretty much looks uniform to me, 100%. The lens is doing a reasonably good job. So let's have a look how the image has improved at f5.6. Now looking at the center, it certainly looks a lot sharper to me. So let's go in there at 100% at f5.6, just to let you know that all these images are taken using ISO 2500. I decided to use the same ISO on both cameras, so we can have a look and get a good idea. Looking at the center, it looks reasonably sharp to me. Looks comparable to 4.5. If we go back to 4.5 and let's just zoom back out. And then zoom back in here to 100%. Let's just compare it to f4.5 to 5.6. 5.6, 4.5. I certainly say in the center, I would say it looks a lot sharper at 5.6. So it seems to be representing quite a good, you know, in terms of quality, it looks pretty good to me. It's always a good idea to try and compare f4.5 to 5.6 in the corners. It does, to me, to my eye, look a bit softer at f4.5, but that's to be expected obviously with an older lens like this. Again, you've got to remember we're using a modern day camera on an older lens. So that's f5.6, sorry. Let's look at f8. So let's have a look in the center at 100%. It seems to have some improvement. Let's just compare it to the 5.6. Normally when you're stopping your lens down, it does tend to give you a better image, and yes, it certainly looks sharper to me. Let's go over here into the corner and compare it to the corner on at 5.6, and it certainly looks sharper to me at f8. And to be honest, using this lens as I have been doing and testing it out, I do think it's a lot sharper at f8 than it is at certainly at f4.5, because this is 4.5 here. Let's just go into the corner here and compare f8 to 4.5. So that's 4.5 there. 5.6, yes. Sorry, f8. I mean, definitely sharper. Typically when you start using apertures higher than f8, you can introduce diffraction, which can have a tendency to soften your image. So just be aware of that. Using smaller apertures doesn't always necessarily mean better quality. So let's look at the last one, which is f16. Again, same ISO. The only difference is going to be shutter speed is going to be a lot slower, but I used a timer on a tripod, 10-second timer, so hopefully there should be no camera shake. Let's move this back to the center. So at f8 versus f16, it does seem to be an improvement in sharpness on there at f16. Back to the f8. f16, a slight improvement. I do want to check the corner here and compare that to the f8. It'll give us an idea on sharpness. So that's F8 there, and let's have a look at F16. It does seem pretty much the same to me. Let's, just for the sake of it, go to 200% there and 200% there at F8 versus F16. It's hard to tell. They're pretty much similar to me. I don't think there's much of a difference there between F8 and F16. So there you are on that particular test. Looking at that, I think it's a good lens. You know, you're not going to be disappointed with the results. Let me know what you think in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. I do appreciate, and like the video if it helps you out looking at the differences in these different apertures. The next thing we're going to look at is an Apsc lens. Sorry, an Apsc camera, the 90D. I want to compare it side by side, looking at these images, and compare it. So let's go and check out the 90D now. So we're gonna check out and compare the 90D images of the test chart, because I want to get an idea on how Apsc challenges this older lens that was made in 2005. Because the pixels are smaller, all Apsc cameras tend to be more challenging on full frame lenses than say full frame cameras are. So the camera we've just tested and looked at, the full frame, the EOS R, is a 30 megapixel camera. Now the 90D is a 32 megapixel camera, a few more pixels more, I know, in terms of megapixels, but in retrospect they are pretty comparable to each other. So we're going to be checking out apertures again. Obviously this one's F4.5. The next one will be 5.6, the one after that F8, and the one after that F16. We're going to check the center, we're going to check the corners. We'll see more or less if it's a good thing to use, because we're actually effectively the focal length is 800 millimeters. So obviously it's certainly 300 millimeters more than than using 500 millimeters on full frame, because that's the effect of putting an Apsc camera on any full frame lens. You have to times it by 1.6, and that gives you your true focal length. So in this particular instance, we've got a 800 millimeter prime lens on this 500, which is insane. You don't always have to use extenders, you know, to make your focal length longer. You can, in effect, use a different camera, like Apsc camera. Obviously, I'm fully aware that the EOS R and the R6 and the R5 don't have any Apsc cameras in their lineups at the moment, but that will change in the coming years. So at the moment I'm using an adapter to adapt EF lenses onto the EOS R camera. Anyway, without further ado, let's have a look at the samples and let's get into this video. So what we want to be doing is obviously zooming into the center and having a look at how the image is resolved at f4.5. So let's zoom in there. We want to be going all the way to 100% just to give us an idea of how sharp it is. Now, it doesn't seem very sharp, if I'm honest with you. It does feel like it's quite soft there. Looking around the image, into the corner, because I do like to have a look and see. We do see some fall off in the corners, but less so than you would have on full frame, because what you got to remember is the majority of the sensor, well, all of the sensor is in the sharpest part of the lens, which is the center. But there is a bit of fall off there, as we can see if we do zoom out a little bit. try and compare it to the centre. Let's have a look in the top corner. 100%. It does feel quite soft. It does seem to be a regular occurrence that the right side of the lens does seem to be not as sharp as the left side. I don't know if that's a manufacturing defect of all lenses, but it does seem to be the case. Looking at that, it just feels very soft. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think on Apsc at F4.5 it's good or not great? Because it doesn't seem like it's that sharp. In general on Apsc, it does feel better on full frame than it does on a crop sensor camera like the 90D. Anyway, let's have a look at F5.6. ISO is 2500, and the only difference is like the shutter speed. So let's go into 100%. I do like to compare it to the different apertures, just to give you a quick representation. To be honest, I don't think there's much difference. It still feels quite soft. 5.6. Let's have a look in corners. Near this 8 tends to be giving me a rough idea of how it's doing in the corners. Does it look any better at f5.6 than it does at f4.5? Not really, no. It might even be a tiny bit worse, if I'm honest. Let's move on to f8. f8 tends to be the sweet spot aperture on most lenses. Does seem to be a bit better, 100%. Compare it at f4.5 at f8, 4.5. Slight improvement. Let's have a look at down where the number 8 was in this corner. Doesn't seem to be that much of an improvement. A little bit. You know, make your own mind up in the comments. Let me know what you think. Do you think it's not fantastic? Let's have a look in the bottom corner, see if that improves anything. F8, 4.5, F8. There's a slight improvement. Let's have a look at F16. Personally, looking at the F16 image, it doesn't look too bad. If I'm honest with you, I probably won't want to crop images using this lens, but you shouldn't have a need to with it being 800mm. Let's have a look in the centre. 100% versus f4.5. That should give us a better idea. f16, f4.5, f16. This is f8, f8, f16, f8, f16. I have to be honest with you, looking at these images, I would certainly say the full frame images certainly look better to me. Let me know in the comments what you think. I think if you're not going to crop in and just use Apsc camera on this particular lens, it should be fine. The imagery should be pretty good. But I think when you start cropping in, that's where you're going to get into problems here, where you realise this lens is not particularly that sharp compared to having it on a full frame. But I tell you what, let's have a look at two images on full frame versus Apsc, and it'll give us more of a comparison, and then you'll see a difference. So okay, that's that. So we're going to compare images from the EOS R, which is full frame, versus Apsc on the 90D. So we're just going to have a look at the images, and hopefully it'll give us a good idea on which is better on this particular older lens. Obviously we already know APS-C is challenging on any full frame lens when you compare it to a full frame camera. So we've got the EOS R here at 30 megapixels, full frame camera, adapted obviously because it's an EF lens, and obviously it's natively on the 90D as well. So you know, I didn't really tell any difference in focusing, it was pretty much the same. So that's a testament to the adapter, the EF adapter that you can put on the EOS R. Anyway, let's have a look at the results that we've got here. So we've got 2 images at f4.5 and 2 images at f8. Generally f8 tends to be the sweet spot of most lenses. And in most cases you have to stop the lens down to give yourself the best results, unless you do have one of the expensive Canon white primes. But generally speaking, if you're buying any sort of other type of lens, off-brand make, you will have to stop it down at least by 1 stop. So the EOS R here at f4.5, let's zoom in there to 100%, like I'd like to do most of the time. It gives an idea on sharpness, and it looks pretty good. I like it. You know, I'd say that's a really good representation of the image. Let's have a look on the 90D. So this is APS-C at f4.5. So let's go into 100%. It doesn't look very good. It looks quite soft, if I'm honest with you. So it may be that APS-C on this particular camera is challenging. So what that means is I would not recommend, if a lens is quite poor on APS-C body, try and avoid cropping in whenever possible, because you've not got the detail to work with. However, if you're on full frame, you certainly will have a better prospect of cropping your images, especially when it comes to wildlife or sports photography. So let's have a look at the 100% in the center on the f4.5 aperture on the EOS R full. So this is full frame. Looks really nice, if I'm honest with you. Looking on APS-C, it looks terrible. Let's have a look in the corners. Let's just go to the EOS R. Look in the corners at 100%. It's just fall off a little bit here, if I'm honest. Looking at there, it's falling off a bit. The APS-C should do a bit better, but because it's already terrible cropping in, I don't really hold much hope for it. So there you can clearly see that the quality is a lot better on the full frame than it is on the APS-C. It just looks blown out and grainy. And obviously the full frame deals with the ISO of 2500 a lot better than it does on an APS-C crop sensor camera, because it's a smaller sensor. You've got to remember that it's much smaller. So going back to full frame, it just looks a lot better, even with the exposure a little bit darker. It's still a lot better. Let's go to the top part here. Let's go back to the 90D top part. Doesn't look good, does it? Not look good at all. Hang on, that's 200%, it's gone too much. Yeah, it's not good, is it? Alright, let's have a look at f8 on the EOS R, which means it should literally blow away APS-C. So let's have a look in the centre. It's 100%. Looks pretty good. APS-C does seem to have improved significantly at f8, but it's still not up to the same quality that we're getting out of the full frame. So, like I've already said, I would probably say to you, don't crop with the APS-C camera on, but you can crop with the full frame EOS R. Let's go into the corner here. I like to check out these bottom corners here and compare it to the Apsc. So it does look quite, not great. It's not great in the corners if I'm honest on the Apsc. Back to the full frame. Looks pretty good to me. Full frame looks fantastic actually. It looks really good even for an older lens. Go back to the Apsc, which is the 90D. 90D, it just doesn't look good in the corners. It really doesn't. Let's have a look in the far corner here, or F8. Back to the EOS R. EOS R looks reasonable. What you find is on full frame in the corners, your image suffers because the lens isn't designed to be fantastic in the corners. It's sharpest in the center of the lens. So obviously if you're going to crop and your image is in the center, cropping is not a problem. On Apsc I would not recommend it. Let's just go back to the center. That's the center on Apsc 90D at 32 megapixels, and on the full frame that we have here it's 30 megapixels. So there's a slight difference with pixels, but 2 megapixels isn't going to make much of a big deal. Apsc versus full frame. I think full frame with this 500 prime wins out. So I would recommend, when you're using an older lens and it's designed for full frame, try and avoid using Apsc on it. At a pinch, obviously you can use the Apsc to extend your focal length and use it as an extender in effect. But I would highly recommend you try putting an extender on while you're using an Apsc camera like the 90D, 80D, 70D, because you're not going to be too happy with the results. So full frame, this lens is reasonably good. Apsc, not so great. Make your mind up in the comments. Tell me what you think about this lens and the quality. You know, I'll churn out another video about some real world examples. Hopefully that will give you an idea on differences in the real world, because obviously the real world doesn't always translate in terms of doing test shots and test charts like we're doing here. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Let me know what you thought about this video in the comments. Do you think any sort of improvement is needed to present these results to you? But thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day.